My name is Haley Owen. I am a student researcher with Earlham College, and I am here today interviewing,
Suzette Weadick,
spelled
SuzetteWeadick.
thank you. The date is November 3rd, 2017, and we are in Richmond, Indiana, in Suzette's home. So we have already gone over the consent and release forms.
Yes, we have.
So we'll go ahead and start with the questions.
Okay.
Thank you for agreeing to be interviewed for the Oral Histories of Place and Identity in Richmond, Indiana project. Could you tell us your date of birth?
I was born March 5th, 1963.
And where were you born, and how long have you lived in Richmond?
I was born in Pasadena, California, and I have lived in Richmond approximately, let me think about this, okay? I think about 13 years now.
When you were a child, what was one of your favorite places?
You mean favorite places like anywhere?
Like a little place that you might have felt comfortable or liked to go play when you were a child growing up, even just not in Richmond, obviously, just wherever you were. And if you can like describe it for us and sort of take us there.
Okay. The first thing that comes to my mind is we lived in a neighborhood with a lot of children, and everybody was about my age, and so we all grew up together, and I have so many fond memories of just like summer times playing in the street in the neighborhood, and I remember having like a big tractor tire, and which is odd because it was in California, but we would all roll up in this tractor tire and roll people down the street. We would swim together, we would play in each other's neighborhoods. It was just everybody trusted each other. You didn't have to worry about anything. So those are my good memories, neighborhood playing.
Thank you. So the furthest back that you can remember it, you were here, what was Richmond like?
Well, when I first moved to the area, I lived across the border in Ohio, and that was about 34 years ago. So at that time around here, Richmond was considered like a big city compared to Eaton, Ohio. And people would come over here to go to the mall and do their shopping, better grocery stores over here, that type of thing. So, and there was a time change at at that time. So it was nice because you could come over here and gain an hour, depending upon what time of year it was. Movie theater over here. So I saw a lot of growth in a small town at that time.
How has it changed since then?
Well, as far as how it has changed, I think in these years that I can see here recently, I think a lot of positive changes are happening with our new mayor. He's encouraging growth in the city, and I think people are reinvesting money in the city, which is a positive thing. I don't know if I'm more aware of this as far as the drugs seem to be a whole lot worse. And I feel like the gap between the rich and the poor is a lot wider than it was back when I first moved here. So, there are definitely pluses and minuses.
How do you think that the new mayor is bringing in positive change? Can you give us some examples of what you're seeing?
Well, I think right now we have a lot of road construction going on, which I know is irritating to people, but then I always try, if I'm sitting in traffic, I try to just think, okay, when this is all over, this is going to be a good thing for the city. I know there are a couple new factories that are going in that will, increase the job market in the area. That's all positive. I think that the new mayor is very available to the public. I think he listens to people. I think he's trying to make positive changes. And I think he's trying to encourage people to shop locally, support the downtown businesses. So those are all good things.
So you said you were from Pasadena, California?
I was born in Pasadena, California. My hometown is Glendora, California.
Is that bigger than?
It is very similar in size to Richmond.
What are some of the differences you noticed between a similar sized city in California compared to Richmond?
I would say that there's the mentality is different in California as far as health and fitness. I think people are way more in tune to making that a priority, whereas around here, I think that people kind of put their health on the back burner. Weather may have something to do with that, So I think that's a big difference is just the mentality of people's outlook on life and their health. And I think the job market where I'm from is better than it is here.
What do you think, instead of health, people more prioritize here?
That's a good question. It's kind of a hard question. I think that the big issue in Richmond is the gap between the rich and the poor, because I think that when you are financially sound, you have the opportunity to do a lot more. And a lot of people are without jobs, so their priorities are completely different than somebody that would have financially the opportunity to do things. So I think that's the difference.
Mm-hmm. So back in California, when you were a child, did you and your family participate in the local community? And if so, how so?
We participated in the sense of, my brothers and I were involved in, sports outside of school and dance and, different clubs like that. So just at a very small level.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel that people in Richmond have a similar community or different to the one that you were used to growing up?
Well, I would say in Richmond, another big difference, but I think is a positive thing for Richmond as opposed to California, is I think the cost of living is so expensive in California that people are just working to survive. Where I feel like in Richmond, it's a sense of community and a sense of family. People take time for each other. They look out for each other. They spend more time living in the present and entertaining, and that's a really good thing.
Do you, for instance, like know your neighbors and get along with them?
Absolutely, yes.
Would you say that that's more of something that happens in Richmond than in other places you've lived, or?
100%, yes. I think that, again, it's a slower life here, so people do take time to reach out to each other. I mean, in California, I don't recall even, like, my parents don't know people that live in the surrounding area, you know, because they get up early, they go to work. A lot of times they have to drive a long distance to get to work, and then they don't get home till late at night. Whereas here, again, it's a slower paced life, but it's a good life because people do take the time for each other.
Can you think of a story that would be an example of that?
Well, I think every day there's a story if you want to stop and think about it and appreciate it and find the good, or you try to be the good to the community. You know, like my neighbor is always really good as far as when the snow comes. If, you know, he's got the snow blower out first, he'll do our driveway as my husband will do their driveway. If you were trying to move, you know, when we moved here into this house, I could call a neighbor and say, hey, we can't lift this ourselves. Can you help us out? People really do, you become family to each other here in a small community.
Could you talk a little bit about the condition you found this house in and what changes you made to it?
Sure. My husband found this house through a friend of ours, and it had been abandoned, and the squatters had lived here. And so he toured the house and made an offer on it. And at the time, I had just been diagnosed with cancer, and so I was, needless to say, not excited at all about this. But he saw the bones to the place, and he wanted to try to revive this house, and we wanted to love it back to life because it was built in 1810. So one of the first houses around here. And we've actually been told that there were 2 presidents that have stayed here. And so we really wanted to try to preserve the life of this house. And we spent a year and a half working on it because we didn't have any plumbing, heat, air, no flooring at all upstairs. The place was a really mess.
Why wasn't there flooring upstairs?
The squatters had actually torn up the hardwood floors, the original hardwood floors upstairs, and burned them in the fireplace for warmth. And, but you know, a lot of the things we were able to salvage, and we just are really very happy here.
It is a beautiful home.
Thank you. Thank you.
So you mentioned being involved in sports and dance back home. Are you involved in the Richmond community here? And if so, how? And in a larger sense of the city, what is different about that? If you can kind of expand on some of the stuff you were mentioning earlier.
Okay. When my daughter was living at home and growing up here, she was very involved in theater here in Richmond. And my husband and I like to support the symphony. We like to support the theater as well. I'm a big advocate for supporting locally owned businesses. I try to attend as many fundraisers that there are and support those in the community. Yeah, I would say I'm very invested in the city.
Can you describe what some of those community events are like?
Sure, they're a lot of fun because it's a lot of like-minded people coming together for the good of the community. I mean, anything from the year they have every year, it's the hype group, which I think is the young professionals, and they put on a beer and wine tasting, and that's always a lot of fun. And it's local beers, local wines, so that's always a lot of fun. Symphony used to do regular fundraisers also, and we would always attend those. The hospital does like the red dress ball. That is for, all the proceeds go to the heart the heart cardiology unit at the hospital. So we like to support that type of thing as well.
What is the most fun one that you've gone to recently? Or the most interesting one?
Okay, let me think about the most interesting one. They're all fun.
Right.
Yes, they're all fun. I would say I always enjoy the wine tasting, just because I like wine for one thing, and a lot of my friends go to that one, because some of the fundraisers are more expensive than others, and a lot of people can't afford that. So the wine tasting is fun because it also attracts young and old people, and it's a great diverse group of people. Mm-hmm. So that's probably been the most fun lately.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you decide to settle here in Richmond?
Well, I decided to settle here because when I first moved to the Midwest from California was because of my husband. He is a farmer just over the state line in Preble County, Ohio. And so we met at a wedding in California, and I fell quickly, madly in love and moved here. And at the time we lived on the farm in Eaton, Ohio. And then years later, when my daughter was in school, our church is in Richmond, and she started going to the Catholic school here in Richmond. And so I was driving back and forth from Eaton for quite a few years, and then we bought a house here in Richmond, just a couple blocks away, and we thought, well, we'll just have this and stay here until she goes to college, and then we'll sell the house and move back to the farm. But since then this opportunity came up with this house, and we just really love being here. We love the feeling that we have like a secluded lot, but yet we're in town. Everything's accessible. So we have chosen to stay here.
Is your church an important part of your sense of community of the area?
My church is my lifeline. Mm-hmm. Very, very important part of my sense of community, my extended family.
Mm-hmm. Do you find that religion is different, the people's general attitudes towards religion is different in different areas that you've lived in the country?
No,
okay.
I don't, because I feel like I I try to surround myself with like-minded people. And I think that anywhere you are, you're going to have believers and you're going to have non-believers. You know, it's just the choice of who you surround yourself with.
It's interesting. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, what are some things that you really, really like about Richmond?
I really, really like my church. I really, really like my friends. I like what's most important to me are the community of my friends, because I don't have family here. They're all in California, with the exception of my daughter who's in Chicago. So my husband and I, our friends are very important to us. And the people here in this community have welcomed us with open arms and are truly like family to us. So I feel like I've been given a second chance in life through my illness. And it's important to me to minister to people and to gather people and to love people. And that's what this home here in Richmond has provided for me to be able to do. So the people are the most important thing to me in Richmond.
How did you meet most of your friends?
Actually, here in Richmond, I met most of my friends through church and my daughter's school.
So do many of them have children at a similar age?
Yes, yes.
Has that been helpful as your daughter grows up?
Yes, it has been very helpful. But I also try to broaden my horizons and not just be friends with people my age, because I think you can learn and grow from every age. And so I think I have a wide range of friends in their ages.
What's something, if you can think of it, that you've learned from someone who's either much younger or much older than you?
Well, I think we can always learn from older people. I mean, I think you can learn from everybody. But I've always had an older person in my life, like through church, that's been homebound and doesn't have any family here. And so I've grown a relationship with these particular people over the years. And just what I have learned from them and how life was. I mean, one woman was, she was 101 when she died. And so I think I came into her life when she was about 94. And the things that I've learned from her, because she grew up here, and just the way life was is so different. And the things that we take for granted that she may never have had the opportunity, you know.
Like what?
Well, her husband died at a very young age and left her a single mom to raise 3 kids. And so she was very poor and didn't have a lot of opportunities and had to work hard, and she never drove, so she walked to work. Even in the snow, she walked to work. And, you know, to me, nowadays, you would never see, you very, very seldom would you see somebody that has the drive to get up and walk to work in the snow, you know. So life lessons like that, I learned from older people. Younger people, I think that their minds are way more open than older people. So I think if I take the time to stop and listen to them and consider maybe their attitude or their outlook on things, could be a learning lesson for me, you know?
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
What are some things that you wish were different about Richmond?
I wish that there was a better job market in Richmond for people. You can drive up and down 40 and all these fast food places have help wanted signs, but, you know, when people have families to support, they can't work at a fast food place and support these kids, you know, they don't have quality of life. And I think that's a big problem with society as a whole, is that, you know, we wonder why people are trying to live off of the system and people are on welfare. I think a lot of times it's, you know, a lot of people are taking advantage of the system, but then there are people that truly, once they are trying to pay child care and they're going to work for minimum wage and they have rent to pay, I mean, it doesn't add up. So I think then it's kind of a downward spiral where people get depressed and people turn to drugs or people sell drugs. So I think the job market is the biggest deficit in Richmond.
What do you think about, the current debate going on about raising the minimum wage?
Well, I think it's a fantastic idea. I think that people, everything else is going up. You go to the grocery store, cost of living, any type of household bills, everything else is going up except for people's wages. So I think it's a good idea.
Did you see the recent plans to increase the water bills here in Wayne County?
Yes, I did. And it was like was about 35% or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, which will make a huge impact in a lot of people's lives. Huge.
What do you think it would take to improve the job market here in Richmond?
Well, we have to be doing things to attract larger companies to want to come to Richmond, Indiana. We have plenty of fast food places. We need people that are going to offer employees health benefits, retirement, things of that nature. So I think as a community, we all need to come together and be willing to do whatever it takes to try to improve the community to attract these larger companies. I don't really know what that answer is, but I'm certainly willing to help and do my part.
Mm-hmm. If you were a larger company, what do you think would attract you to the area if you had that power?
If I had that power. Well, I think that from what I've heard from different people that are, like, when Reed is trying to hire new doctors in and that sort of thing, as crazy as it sounds, I know a lot of the doctors' wives have said, oh, there's no shopping in Richmond, and that sounds so shallow. But when you start thinking like what it's going to take to attract people. I mean, if that's what it's going to take to bring dollars into the community, you know, we have to be willing to, not necessarily, we don't have to be willing, we have to get somebody, you know, like when we had Target here. Again, it sounds crazy, but everybody loved Target, you know, and then things like that. You have to get a company to say, okay, I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to trust this, and I'm going to believe that the community is going to support us in that. It's a real problem. I don't know what the answer is, because it seems like it's just a vicious circle. You know, you've got to get people that are willing to take a leap of faith and believe that we will support them.
Mm-hmm. Before we move on to the next question, so some people that we've talked to have mentioned that this is not just a Richmond-specific problem, but a problem consistent throughout many parts of the Rust Belt. And that, you know, communities all over that area are struggling and not sure what to do. And that if it's such a widespread problem, then that makes it even harder to find a solution to and to bring people in. What do you think about that?
I think that's absolutely true. I think it's a really difficult thing, because I think it is very widespread. We are certainly not alone in the struggle in small town USA, you know. I don't know. I wish that there was a simple answer. If there was, then everybody would be doing it, you know. Again, it goes back to the gap is widening between the rich and the poor. And the rich seem to just be hoarding it and closing their eyes to what the reality is to the rest of the population, instead of coming together and trying to genuinely help people out that are lower income, that may never have the opportunity that somebody with money has. I think that that's a big part of the problem.
What is a way that people could come together and help other people out?
Well, I know I volunteer locally. I think that there are many avenues that people can use if they don't have money that they could, you know, monetarily give. They can give their time or their talents, and we have a lot of really good organizations in Richmond, and one of them that comes to mind is Birthright, and it is run solely by volunteers. Everything there is donated.
What does Birthright do?
Birthright is there to help mothers. We do pregnancy testing free of charge. We do diapers, formula, wipes, and clothing through 2 years old. We have maternity clothing. So it's a great ministry for young girls who may be scared, and we also do counseling to these girls. We walk the walk with them through their pregnancy. We can even set up the first free doctor's appointment for them, and they get an ultrasound for free here locally. So it's a really great organization that, you know, some of these women, not just necessarily girls, women who financially couldn't afford to go to a doctor, or can't afford, they're running short because they're working for minimum wage. And so they run out of formula or they don't have diapers for their baby. They know that once they walk through the doors at Birthright, we are going to love them unconditionally. We're going to help them with diapers, no judgment, no questions, no proof of anything. And that's just one of the many hidden things that Richmond does for people that is a positive that people don't really acknowledge. It's a great ministry for young girls and women.
So I actually have a question that's based on some stuff from where I'm from. In Knoxville, Tennessee, we've had a problem with a large amount of babies being born addicted to opioids. Do you know if that has been a problem here as well?
It's a huge problem. Again, I think it's not just here locally, as you just stated. I think it's the problem is getting bigger and bigger. Yes, we actually have here locally at Reed Hospital a baby rocking program that again is run by volunteers, and these nurses are so maxed out, working so hard with these mothers that are strung out, giving birth to drug-borne babies, and so they need the volunteers. And it's a great, great program. Unfortunately, we need it, just like there's also another program at Richmond High School called Diplomas for young girls that are students so they can finish their education. If they have a baby, they can bring the baby to school with them. They have this separate program for the children, which, at first I didn't think it's like encouraging these girls, but then the reality of it is these young girls are having babies. And if we want them to finish their education and to try to go to college so they can get a good job, we need to have another alternative for these girls to be able to bring their babies. So I think that's a good program as well.
Thank you. So we're also wondering, how do you think that your attitudes personally about Richmond and the community might be different from either some of your friends or just some people that you know who are also in the community? And where do you think people disagree about Richmond?
Well, again, I'm sorry that I keep going back to the gap between the rich and the poor. I think that's where people disagree, because you can ask the very same question to somebody that is financially sound, and then you can ask somebody that's struggling and can't afford to buy their kids' diapers, People that have a privileged life don't really get what it's like to not be able to afford to buy diapers for your kids, So I think that's where the line has been drawn, is I think just the mentality between the two. I feel for the people that struggle, because it's kind of how do these people get out of that pit that they're in, in other words, like working for minimum wage and having babies that they can't necessarily afford, but they're having them. And then those children are raised in poverty and they don't know any differently. So then they end up just like their parents. I feel like that's a real problem in this community.
Please let me know if you don't feel comfortable answering this question. But how do you feel about sex education?
I think that no matter how somebody feels, the reality is it's 2017 and, my morals and my thoughts don't necessarily factor into what really is going on. So all I can do is try to be an advocate to help educate these young kids about not only getting pregnant, but sexually transmitted diseases. I think that it's a real problem because, again, I think kids are bored. They don't have anything to do, so then they get into trouble. In other words, be it sex or drugs,
Mm-hmm. How do you think that living in Richmond has influenced who you are and how you identify with yourself?
Well, having grown up in California and feeling like a piece of my heart will always be in California because my family is there, I always thought, oh, I'm Californian through and through. But then the longer that I'm here and the sense of community that is in this community, there are so many good things in Richmond if you choose to find them and use them, utilize them and support them. So I think that I've changed because Richmond has allowed me to slow down and enjoy life much more than I would if I was living in a big city.
What do you think the difference is between if you had moved to a big city instead? How?
I think that it's, although big cities offer more opportunity as far as diversity, things to do, that type of thing, then you have cost of living is a lot more. It's more of a rat race, and I think that you just, your identity becomes work because you don't really have time to enjoy all the things that you have and all the opportunities that a big city will bring. You don't have time to enjoy that because you're busy working, trying to keep a roof over your head.
You mentioned diversity. How do you feel about the diversity here in Richmond?
I think that there's some diversity in Richmond. I think Earlham College helps with that a lot if people open their eyes to that. And again, I think that Earlham College is a little hidden gem in Richmond, Indiana. But I know when my daughter was going to the Catholic school, and then we made the decision at high school age to send her to Richmond High School, I really thought I wanted to open her eyes to diversity. And there's a lot more of it there in the public school system than there was in the private. And I just wanted her to be prepared and open to other walks of life. So, there's definitely some diversity in Richmond.
Do you feel that that interplays with the wealth gap going on in this city?
not necessarily. Yeah, I don't think, at least here, I think the color of your skin doesn't necessarily mean you have more opportunities. Here, anyway.
Right. Every city is different.
Right.
Do you have any final thoughts that you would like to share?
Well, overall, I think that Richmond, Indiana is a really good place to live. And I think that there are locally some great things to keep people here. And I'm happy to be a resident of Richmond, Indiana, and I'm also happy to be a part of growth and moving forward in the community.
One last thing. If you were in charge of Richmond, what would you do?
Well, first of all, I'm really glad I'm not in charge of Richmond. Because I think it's a huge, the job market is a huge problem. And I don't know what the answer is to that. But I do feel hope, a lot of hope with the new mayor in trying to make things happen and grow the community in a good way. So I think the mayor's doing a great job, and I'm just really glad I'm not the mayor.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Haley.